Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome. I'm Maxim Isaac, Member Services Manager at the Charles River Regional Chamber, and I'm glad you're joining us today for our webinar, How to Have Difficult Conversations with More Confidence and Ease, with our business coach, Hanneke Antonelli. We'd like to give a special shout out to our sponsors, Needham Bank, CMIT Solutions, InSource Services, and William James College. Their support helps create programs like this make possible. I'll stop sharing my screen and I'll pass it over to you, Hanukkah. Thanks for being here.
Hi, hello, and thank you. Yes, thank you so much for having me here today. And thank you for everybody who is showing up to this call today or listening to the replay. And so today, as you know, we are going to transform the way that you approach tough conversations so that you can lead with confidence and create better outcomes for you and your team. Now, as someone who has had her coaching practice for over a decade now, where I help service based entrepreneurs to scale their companies to a million and beyond, a lot of that work that I do with my clients is helping them to be able to have these tough conversations, to get more comfortable with being able to lead in a bigger way. So, when you leave today, we are going to help you to understand what the first step is to having a successful conversation that's going to lead to better results for you and your team. And then I'm also going to teach you a couple of effective communication and coaching tricks to handle any conversation like a pro. And then from there, we're going to discuss the benefits of having a third party accountability partner to amplify your leadership skills. Now, one little thing before I dive into today's session is you'll notice that I don't have any slides with me today. And I intentionally did that because we are going to be talking about having conversations, right? And that means we want this to be a little bit more interactive. So I'm going to ask some questions and then you can answer those in the polls for me. Please know that we are going to have a Q&A session at the end. So if you're calling in from a phone, I would like you to just hold your conversations for us until the end, because a lot of my poll questions or the questions I'm going to ask that we will answer in the chat box during my conversation is more just taking a pulse on what you're learning or how you're feeling about difficult conversations. You'll also know, and Maxim is going to share this as a link for us in the chat box. Um, I'm going to share this little workbook with you. And you're not going to need to fill out this workbook today. You can certainly follow along because it will follow the pattern of this talk or webinar that I am giving today. But the main purpose of this workbook is for you to have this in your back pocket for future difficult conversations. So you can return back to this resource to help you to really have those difficult conversations with more ease and confidence. So don't worry if you're getting lost in the book. The book isn't supposed to be the thing that you really fill out today, but you can take some notes, obviously. Okay, so that was a lot of talk. Now I want to know from you all, when you think about the next difficult conversation that you have to have, or in general, difficult conversations, how confident on a scale from 1 to 5 do you feel right now in handling those conversations? And I'd love for you to just put that in the chat box for us. So, on a scale from 1 to 5, how confident do you feel right now about handling difficult conversations? 2.8, I love that. Ooh, a 3, 3.5. Okay, yes, lots of twos, lots of threes, 3, 2.5, 2.8. Okay, so we're kind of like Sort of, not really excited about having difficult conversations, right? And first, before I even dive into this conversation, I want to acknowledge and normalize that it is okay for you not to be excited about having a difficult conversation, right? It is normal for us to feel some level of dread, some level of fear, some level of avoidance, discomfort, whatever that feeling is that you get whenever it is that you've got to go and have a conversation that's going to be a bit sticky with someone. Let's just normalize the fact that you're feeling like that. So accept that those feelings are going to be there, because nobody wants to walk into a conversation and upset someone or give them bad news or whatever it may be that the beef of the conversation is. So let's just first accept those feelings. Let's not try and push them away. It's okay that they're there. But as Peter Bromberg says, who's a librarian and an advocate for libraries, when we avoid difficult conversations, we trade short-term discomfort for long-term dysfunction. And I'm going to actually put this in the chat box for you to have there. When we avoid difficult conversations, we trade short-term discomfort for long-term dysfunction. So really ask yourself when you're, avoiding these conversations, what is the cost to you financially, emotionally, physically, and then also the long-term ramification of not really addressing the situation. And you can type into the chat box if there's what a specific thing that you know at this moment that this avoidance is costing you. Okay. So now, okay, we don't want to avoid these conversations, right? We want to be more confident. So how do we get to even get there? So that brings us to the first thing we're going to learn today. And that is the first step to having a successful conversation that's going to lead to better results. Now, to do that, we have to understand control. We have to decide on the desired outcome, and we have to identify missing information. So that means, if we really think about that if we're going to have all these things in there, we have to prepare for a difficult conversation. So that really is your very first step. And I understand that sometimes we can't prepare for conversations. They maybe just come in from left field and sideswipe us. But I'm also going to give you a trick for if that happens to you. But the first step that you're going to have to understand is that you can't just run into a conversation and fly by the seats of your pants if you're going to have a difficult conversation. So setting yourself up for success, helping you to feel more confident, is in the preparation. So how do we prepare? That's when we dive into these three things: understanding control, deciding on a desired outcome, and identifying missing information. So let's start with the control piece. Can you type for me in the chat box, when you walk into any conversation, what is it that you have control over? My emotions, yes. Your emotions, yeah. What I say, absolutely. Control over myself, my words, my actions, correct there. Awesome. Okay. So those are the things: how I react and respond, my mindset. Hang on, Liz, there's so many good ones coming. Beautiful. My body language. There's some very intuitive people on here today. I love it. My tone. That's so correct. Okay, so those are all the things that you want to start to go over while you're preparing for this conversation. And you want to go, okay, so how do I want to feel having this conversation? And again, you're not going to feel happy, right? But can I at least feel some level of groundedness? How am I going to carry myself as I walk into this room? And by the way, a lot of what I'm saying today, you can just use in general when you're showing up in say spaces and places in the world, right? Um, and so yes, what are the words that I'm going to use? Am I going to cross my arms? My body language is going to show that I'm not approachable. Or am I going to keep it relaxed and open so that this person starts to feel comfortable in my presence, right? Now, what is the thing that we don't have control over in a conversation? Type that in the chat box. The other person, how the other person responds, exactly. Reactions of the other person. Yes, yes, yes. Okay. So even though we don't have control over the other person, right? We are never going to be able to understand how they are going to respond, react. None of that is within our control. What we do have as human beings is we have general empathy. So we can put ourselves in the position of another person and we can go, if this was me, how would I want to get this information delivered to me? How would this make me feel? So you're anticipating what their response might be in preparation for this, but you understand that you can't say things just to have them have a certain conversation or a certain reaction. Does that make sense? So we are anticipating what they will do, using what we have control over, but we're not going to say things to manipulate or try and have them have a certain something. So really the key takeaway here is just to focus on yourself, your body language, and how you are going to set yourself up. Which brings us to the next thing in when you're preparing for a conversation is the desired outcome of this conversation. So what is the goal of this conversation, right? And sometimes the goal of this conversation is not going to have a happy ending, specifically if we have to have conversations where we have people where we release them from a company, where, you know, we have to give them really tricky, sticky feedback, bad news, anything like that. You want to really start to think about, okay, but what is the best possible outcome, even of this difficult, bad situation? And if that is the desired outcome, are there some pieces of the information that I'm missing that I need to gather first before I walk into this conversation? You also want to ask yourself, how do you want to feel when you are done with this conversation? And then what points do you have to get across during this conversation? So I want you to write down real quick, what are 3 key messages that you want to communicate in an upcoming difficult conversation? And you can pop it into the chat box if you want to, or you can just write it down. But 3 key messages you want to communicate in an upcoming difficult conversations. Yes, clear expectation. No more room for mistakes, increased accountability, and higher standards. Okay. I'm going to use those 3 things. So for me, when I hear that no more room for mistakes, I'd like that to be super clear and clear. And I understand that you're probably going to do that in this conversation, Cooper. But just so you're very clear when you're going into a conversation, Make it a smart conversation. Now, I don't typically like SMART goals because they can sometimes be a little restrictive. However, when it comes to dealing with employees or when we're dealing with other people, we have to have these, someone said that, clear expectations. So make sure that when these clear expectations are quantified, what mistakes are we referring to? What is the specific outcome of a goal? What is the timeline? So the clearer you can get in the message, the better. And this is where it comes to to really making sure that if there's some missing pieces of the puzzle that you still have to gather, these are some of the missing pieces of the puzzle. Okay, this is the desired outcome that I want. How can I make it more clear? What are the things that have happened in the past that I can point to as examples to here's where things went wrong? And then a little pro tip here. Never show up to a conversation making assumptions. Always be prepared, come prepared with all of the facts. And specifically, when we're having conversations with people who can be very volatile in their emotions, we want to ensure that when they veer conversations off to left field and people get charged up, that we bring things back to the facts. And that's also why that having that desired outcome is so important, because while you're in this conversation, you've got to continually remind yourself that we're working towards that desired outcome. Today's conversation is just about achieving that one, two, three things. Because very often when we deliver some bad news, people's first reaction will be, excuse me, will be to just blow everything up or want to go in all sorts of directions. And that's when we want to make sure that we keep them focused on the facts and that desired outcome. The other thing when having difficult conversations and tricky conversations is to remember that very often you're going to catch the other person off guard because you did some preparation, but maybe there wasn't any preparation that they could have been given to have this conversation, right? Specifically, if it's about we're going to let someone go. So that's when we want to remember that the person may have very big emotions, and that is normal. And to not take anything that's happening personally, because it's not personal. And the more you can stay in that, like, this isn't personal, this is a business conversation, or even if it's a conversation with, a personal conversation, it's not personal. They're just having a big reaction. Let's stick to the facts. Let's stick to my desired outcome and how I want to show up and really focusing on your emotions. Now, what happens if someone comes in from left field and they're like, catch you in the hallway, or your kid or someone in your family, all of a sudden throws this conversation on you that you were not fully prepared for, or you feel very uncentered to have in this moment? This is really when we want to start to honor boundaries. And I know there's a lot of, like, it's the hot word at the moment. Well, you got to put in boundaries, right? But what does that actually mean? It basically just means you owning your agency by knowing and taking control over what you have control over. And that is simply stating, like, hey, this is a very important conversation, and I would like to be more prepared to really have this constructive conversation with you. Can you give me a little time? Can I get back to you? So never be afraid, specifically if you start to feel extremely unsettled, right? Like if we get that, like, right, like this just came out of nowhere. Simply just say, hey, not now. Can we have this later? And specifically having like a nice little line in your back pocket. This is super important. I want to give you the dedication and the time and the attention that this deserves, but I'm not in that headspace right now. let's set a time to really talk through this, and then you come up with whatever time that will be. So never be afraid to postpone a conversation. All right. And that is when, specifically when you have to do that, that's when you're going to be able to practice some of these tools and tricks that I'm going to share next. Which brings us to the effective communication and coaching tricks to handle any conversation like a pro. So, how do we make that happen? So, there are three ingredients to having more, or three ingredients, three tricks that I'm going to teach you basically. One of them is the power of open ended questions. The next thing is practicing active listening skills, which is one of my favorite things as a coach. And then also the power of acknowledgement and validation. So first off, if you forget anything that I said today, right? If you're like, okay, that was fun. I'm just going to walk on. This is cool. But if there's one thing that I want you to remember from today's um, session that's really going to make a difference is always reminding yourself that whomever is in front of you is a person. And all of us as humans want to feel seen, heard, and understood. So, how can you show up and make someone feel seen, heard, and understood? And that's where these coaching tricks come in. So, first off, the way that we can make people feel more understood is by being curious with them. And we become more curious by asking open ended questions. Taking a minute and asking them open-ended questions. Now, do we on the call know what an open-ended versus a close-ended conversation is? And if you do, hop on into the chat and tell me a little bit about that. Open-ended questions versus closed-ended questions. Oh. All right, juicy. Okay. Yes, there we go. Not a yes or a no. That is a closed-ended conversation. Exactly. Yes. So any question that you ask that is going to lead to a yes or a no answer is a closed-ended or a closed-ended question. So those of you who do a lot of networking, and if you're anything like me, where you get a little like, if someone is not, someone who just freely starts to talk to you, stop asking closed-ended questions, right? That's like the quickest way to help yourself in any conversation if you don't want to feel like you have to do all the work in the conversation. But when it comes back, when we come back to having, these tricky conversations, the more open-ended questions we can ask, the more information we can gather. And the reason you want to gather that information is, one, so that you can get more understanding of where things went wrong. If it's a conversation where we have to dive into giving feedback or training or anything like that. But also what happens when we have open-ended questions is we get to that, like making this person feel like we're caring a little bit more deeply because we are paying attention and we're drawing more information out of them. We're not being dismissive. So then once you have done that, so normally, how do we do that? How do we start open-ended questions? What are the words that we use for open-ended questions? So closed-ended questions will very often start with, did you? Have you seen this, that, or the other? Open-ended questions start with what, where, when, who, and how. What, where, when, who, and how. That is like, if you can start your sentences with those 5 words, it's an open-ended question. And yes, Megan, you can actually also use or absolutely use tell me about your experience. If you do want to, pull things in a little closer, then you would use that what, where, when, who, and how. The one word or a question that you always want to avoid, specifically when you're having a tricky conversation, is why. Why questions immediately have an accusatory tone to them and put someone on their hind legs in a defensive state. So as much as possible, if you can, avoid asking why questions, specifically when you're having those tricky conversations. Okay. Now, once you've asked these questions, your what, where, when, who, and how questions, you then want to start listening. And when we say active listening, we are listening for more than just the words that the person is speaking. So you want to start listening to what is the tone that they're talking in. Are they speaking in an excited way, or are they speaking in a "Oh, I'm not really feeling this kind of depressed way," right? So really getting clear on that. Then you want to listen for words and phrases that they keep repeating, because that might give you some information about something that's not being said, that you can then go, I noticed that you used this word a lot. What is happening? What makes that important? And then the conversation will go further, right? So active listening skills mean we are listening for more than just the person's words. We're looking at body language, we're listening for tone, and we're listening for repeated uh, words that they may be saying. Finally, you're going to wrap all of what we said earlier in one little nice bow for the person that you're speaking to by acknowledging and validating what you heard. So after you ask those open-ended questions, you've now been listening, and now you're going to say, I notice that you don't seem very happy right now. I'm hearing that this is very frustrating for you. I can appreciate that this must feel. So you're really showing this person by acknowledging and validating them that you're understanding where they're coming from. And that's the quickest way that you disarm someone. If you've ever been on a customer service call where you went in all like, these people are coming down, and then somehow you don't lose your marbles on this call, or you get all like fired up with them, it's because they practiced this. They saw you come in all hot-headed and very excited and very angry, and they were like, hey, I totally appreciate that. That must be so frustrating for you. It immediately disarms anybody. It's a very, very valuable trick to have in your back pocket. And it will, again, help us to attain and achieve that goal of making the person feel seen, heard, and understood in your presence. This is also a way for you as a manager or a leader of a company, a business owner, to build better rapport and trust with your employees. Now, what happens, because this is gonna happen, because we are all just human, what happens if the conversation devolves and everybody gets a little bit fired up and activated in emotion, including yourself? This is where I want to invite you to again come back to, okay, this is no longer productive. Let's put a pin in this. And you can do that by using that acknowledgement. Hey, I'm noticing that both of us are really activated right now. We're really fired up. I don't think we're going to have the best outcome here, or this is going to be the most productive conversation for us. So let's put a pin in this and let's go and really digest a little bit and then come back and have this conversation again. This is also a beautiful thing to use in your personal life. So when you and a partner are getting into a heated discussion, hey, babe, let's cool off a minute. Let's just not talk about this for a second. And then let's come back and we can discuss it when we're both feeling a little bit more grounded and neutral about this. Okay. So this brings us to the final little part of today's discussion, which is the benefits of having a third-party accountability partner. Now, as I mentioned, a lot of the work that I do with my clients is to help them to scale their businesses and grow their teams. I work on a lot of things in someone's business, but a very big portion of the time that I spend with my service-based entrepreneurs is on helping them to prepare for having conversations with their employees that are going to lead to better outcomes and better growth for the business, and or to hire people, fire people. All sorts of tricky things happen when we are running a business, right? And then this is where having a third party accountability partner becomes so valuable. So, who here has ever wished that they had someone to bounce ideas off before having that tough conversation? You can let me know in the chat box. Do we wish we had someone? Yes. Me, yes, yes, yes. Absolutely. Excellent. Okay, so that's going to be part of my challenge to you is to either find someone in the office or find another entrepreneurial friend, or if you need a business coach or a coach, reach out to me or anybody else that you know who is a coach to help you to become that third party accountability partner. And the reason why it's so valuable, I mean, just the fact that everybody here is saying yes, I think it's kind of, why it's valuable. Because one, it's going to help you to role play. It's going to help you to get more confident in having that conversation. But the other thing that is probably the most valuable thing about having an independent third party person help you prepare for a difficult conversation is the fact that it helps you to become a little bit more strategic in your thinking about how you want to approach that conversation and what you want to say and mention. And the reason why that happens is because we're all human. We all get like a little fired up and a little too in something and into the weeds where we can't see, what is really the fact here. Because we all have that thing in us that we want to be right. Sometimes it's very difficult to stay objective always. And that's when then it becomes so valuable to have someone whose number you can dial on and go, hey, I got to do this thing. And like, this is what's going on. And you get to vent and get your emotions out before you go and dump it on the other person. So really pausing and being able to focus on the bigger picture and the greater good of what you want the outcome of that conversation to be is where a third party accountability partner becomes so valuable. And then finally, the other thing that someone who is not involved directly in what needs to happen can help you with is by providing the unbiased feedback to improve communication. So, if you're serious about mastering leadership conversations, really consider working with a coach or, like I said, finding an accountability partner within your network, within your office that you can really bounce ideas off of. Okay, so in summary, we have now taught you, and you should now know that the first thing that you need to do to have a more successful conversation is to actually prepare for that conversation by focusing what you have control of, releasing what you don't have control of, and really preparing for your desired outcome. Then you're also going to use some of those effective communication strategies that I mentioned, which are the open-ended questions: what, where, when, who, and how. You're going to do some active listening, look at the person's body language, look at the speed of which they're talking, the tone, the loud, what is happening. And then you're going to validate that person. I hear, I see, it sounds like, it seems, right? And then from there, you're going to all go out and you're going to find yourself a third party accountability partner that's going to help you to have these conversations and to talk through these conversations so that you can show up with more confidence. So now I want to know, before we open this up for a Q&A where you can ask me anything, I want to hear from you. How confident do you feel now about handling a difficult conversation? On a scale from 1 to 5, where do we land now? Oh, we've gone to a 4. I love it. I love it. 4, 4, 4. Beautiful. Excellent. 3.5. I'll take a 3.5. Anything over a 3 is good. And if you're still at a 2 or a 3, that's fine too. It takes some practice to put all these little tips into action and to then get confident with having conversations that may feel like, oh, awesome. Love that. Well, thank you all so much for listening. And now I would love to invite you. You can speak up, you can unmute yourself, and you can ask some questions if you have them.
Hi, I have a question.
Yes.
So I noticed when you were talking about how sometimes when the conversation gets really heated and you want to take a break from it and come back to it later, I
Hmm.
noticed you did not use the words emotional. You said like we're getting fired up, we're getting activated. Um, is using the word emotional like definitely never recommended? Or like what are the other words that you would use instead?
So, look, sometimes we say stuff in the moment, right? So if you let slip emotional, that's fine. But here's what I am going to say. I know specifically when we say someone got really emotional, it's normally not in a good way, right? Even
Mhm.
if they got emotional because they were upset and crying, it's still like a negative thing there.
Yeah.
The other thing, just in thinking of, genderly, normally we will throw that on women. It's like, oh, they got super emotional, right? So that's why we kind of want to just stay away from using that, or I would stay away from that. There's no right and wrong here, right? It's you, and you have to act in alignment with who you are as a human being and what your authentic self is, right? But staying away from the word emotion and rather saying, hey, you're just acknowledging the emotion. We're
Mhm.
both very frustrated right now.
Mhm.
So you're getting a little bit more specific versus saying, well, you're just emotional, right? It's a bit
Mhm.
more dismissive. Where if we just go, hey, we're both very fired up right now. We're both clearly super angry about this, which shows both of us that we really care about this. So let's just take a breather. So the more you can acknowledge the emotion, specifically when you're doing the validation piece, because the skill that you're using there when you are going to say that, let's take a pause, is the validation piece. You're validating yourself and you're validating them, right? Sorry, I've got a little something in my throat all of a sudden. And so the more specific we can be with the emotion that we are hearing or seeing, the quicker we're going to diffuse that person. Does that make sense, Megan?
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else? Oh, if you're sorry, that was Maxim that asked the question. Go for it.
Well, first off, thank you so much for the seminar today. You did a wonderful job, and I think we're pretty much all in agreement that like we definitely feel better about approaching difficult conversations moving forward. My question is, so I kind of approach this as wanting to be better at having difficult conversations with my manager versus like an employee. And I definitely do think that some of the things you said like can help like manage that, especially one of the key points that you said was like if it gets too activated, just say, hey, let's just address this another day when we're like more calm. Is there maybe any other tips you may have for me in particular about if I want to use these tactics, how to go about it with a manager versus like someone who's my employee?
Yes. All right. So this is where it's managing up, right? So in that situation, I would say you're absolutely still going to use all of this, and you're just going to say it maybe in a different tone. Like, when you're the managers, you're not that you're speaking down to people, but you have more authority, or it will feel like you have more authority. In this place, you're maybe just going to be a little bit more careful with the words that you're choosing. You're not going to tell your boss, you seem super fired up about this, right? Maybe what you're going to use instead is like, clearly this is very important to you, and I'm not prepared right now. And I really want to be prepared because I care about getting the outcome that you just told me you wanted to. Does that help a little bit? Do you hear the subtle?
I wish I had that in our other meeting. That helps a lot.
Yeah, right. So it's really just subtle in like, remember that so with business owners, right? Because I work with so many of them. They have a very specific outcome that they're going towards, and they can get very annoyed when the person that's working for them is not getting to that outcome. So you just want to acknowledge how important their goal is, that you know that this goal is important. You want to acknowledge that you are committed to getting to that outcome, and therefore, now what do you need from them to help you to get there,
That makes sense.
right?
Yeah, that was great advice. Thank you.
All right, excellent. Okay, I'm going to read some of the things in the chat box for just a minute here, and then we can go to live questions again. I am in a situation where my boss is very difficult, conversation avoidant, and it impacts our entire team. Are there any tips on how to help her along, aside from sharing this webinar? Share the webinar. Look, oh, I feel you, because it all depends on how much self-awareness the person you are dealing with has. And if we have people in power that have less self-awareness, it can become very difficult. But perhaps wait for a moment, Laura, where this boss expresses to you how frustrated she is that, something is happening. And then you can take that opportunity to go and say, yeah, right. Have you noticed like that this happens a lot? And I wonder if, what do you, or you can coach them a little bit, right? So you can ask like, what do you think happens that is leading to this outcome? Right? And help them to cultivate awareness about their behavior that may be leading to the team feeling frustrated. So this is coaching world now, right? That's the whole point of why coaches ask open-ended questions, is to help someone else to become more aware of their involvement and their actions that is leading to a certain result. And if you have more beef for me, Laura, like let's talk about it. Does that help? Let me see if you said something in the bottom. Okay. Okay, that's an interesting view. Perfect. Should the word you be avoided? Example, you seem upset with me. No, because you are talking to the person, they're sitting in front of you. I think it's okay to use you, except if it's you in an accusatory way, where it's like, you always do this, right? Then we're accusing the person and we're using absolute language, which absolute language is like the person doesn't always do that. Sometimes they do this. So that's where you want to rather what you can change there if you feel like that is feeling a little bit too poignant. You can say, I'm noticing that you seem very upset. So you're starting a little bit, you're not just starting with like, you seem really upset about this. It's like, I am noticing, taking a little bit of ownership with what your perspective of the situation is, and also showing that because that's your perspective, you're willing to kind of have them change it, if that makes sense. What if the conversation is more about them personally, but in a work context, i.e., they don't have good social skills, such as giving people personal space, which makes others uncomfortable? Okay, so this is again where you want to use the Jimmy. Have you noticed that when you show up and you do X with the team or with a specific person, that they have this reaction? Have you become aware of that? And then they're going to go, yes, I did notice it. You're like, so what do you think? Why do you think that is happening? And now let's notice that I said, why do you think that is happening? Because that's not accusatory, right? Like now we're just staying still curious. I'm not saying, why do you always do this? She's like, what do you think is happening that is the outcome, or that they're feeling like that, or that they're behaving like that? So you're really trying to coach the person to get more aware of their behaviors that are tripping other people up. Does that help, Amy? All right. Yes, perfect. Thank you, Amy. Yes, so definitely in that conversation, Amy, just always stick to the observation and the impact that the person has on the other people, and then like cultivating their awareness around that. Okay, who else has a question? We have some time for a few more before we want to get you all back to work and off to the weekend.
I have a quick question.
Yes.
Do you have any advice for how to end a meeting after, the person may have been receptive to the feedback, but you want them to leave on a good note, and especially if they have to interact with coworkers and customers, how to maybe end that so that either you're both happy or that person can walk away feeling like they got something out of it?
Okay, give me a little bit more context here. So
Yeah,
what?
so like for example, if I were to give feedback to an employee,
Mhm.
they were receptive to it, they understand what they might have done wrong, but they're in a bad mood when they leave. I mean, we want to try to avoid that, especially if they have to interact with other customers and if they're here for the entire day. Is there a trick or tips that we can kind of get them to be in a good mood when they leave, or if it's just kind of up to how the meeting went, sort of thing?
So one, we don't have control over how the person's going to feel. It is normal that the person is going to feel upset. It's normal that they're going to be in a bad mood. So I would say, if you're giving them feedback, you would say, listen, I know this was hard for you to hear today and that this isn't great. How about, you take an early lunch and just, you go digest this a little bit, and then you can come back when you're feeling a little bit bitter about the situation. But there isn't really anything that you can do to make someone else feel better other than give them space to process it in their own time.
Yeah, it's very helpful. Thank you.
All right. Okay. Len asks, always concerned about getting sued for discrimination, etc. when having an uncomfortable conversation, any advice on choice of words, things to avoid? So again, if you're just practicing active listening skills and you're asking open-ended questions because you're trying to understand a situation and you're coming from that place of like, I'm really trying to get to the bottom of this, that's really all you can do. I'm not a lawyer, so but if it's something where it involves like letting a employee go and there's some legal things that need to, or there's legal ramifications to this conversation, please go to your lawyer and make sure that you say the right things and that you avoid phrases or words that they want you to avoid. But other than just, if you are preparing and you want to be someone who is showing up in a grounded and respectful way, because right, discrimination is disrespecting others. So if you're coming with the intention of I want to be respectful, then trusting yourself that you're not going to jump in landmines knowingly. Megan, and I didn't get the person who asked earlier the question just now, but she's saying you should just do it at the end on a Friday. And that's not wrong, Megan. Like, I feel like, yes, maybe time that conversation so that it's at the end of the day before they go home, so that they have time, or right before lunch, as I mentioned, so that they have some time to go and digest and get over it. Also, back to that conversation, there's always something that you can say, like, look, I know this was tough for you to hear. Is there anything that I can do that would be helpful for you right now so that you can go back and show up for your job in a better state? That is something that you can ask. Okay, anybody else?
Going once, going twice. Okay, thank you so much, Hanneke. I think everyone had great questions and your presentation was really informative. I'll send your contact information in the recap along with this recording and that workbook link for everyone to have.
Yeah.
But please continue the conversation with Hanneke if you have other questions. But have a great weekend and thanks so much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for being here, for having me, for staying present. Absolutely reach out to me whenever if you have more information or more questions. And then definitely keep that workbook in your back pocket as you prepare for future conversations. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.